Our next topic is non-industrial private forest management considerations. Our speaker is Steve Gettle from Woodland Investment Services. Steve graduated with an associate's in environmental science and forestry from Keystone Junior College, and then went to school at SUNY and graduated with a BS in resource management. Steve has since been working. He worked for Boise Cascade and Mead West Vaco, and that land base for a number of years. Worked for TRG for a couple of years as their stumpers procurement manager, and now is a private forest consultant working for himself with his son, Woodland Investment Services out of Jay. Steve also he's interested in woodworking and hunting and all the stuff that probably most of us in this room are. So Steve's been around the industry in a long time, and a good friend. So Steve, where are you? So you got the, yep. Yeah, just this one especially because it won't lay flat.
Okay.
Okay, and you're forward and back and
10-4. I used to laugh at everybody had to take their glasses with them in the woods, but now I'm there. So, yes, I'm a owner of Woodland Investment Services. My son is sitting over there. Stand up, Al. That's my son. So that's the team, about the two of us. Okay. So we manage. When I was asked to do this, I was like, well, I guess I'll give it a shot. Okay. So just kind of go through some things that we deal with every day, working on private landowners. So just got to, how many of you guys work off of company land with private landowners? Just raise your hand. So we're the minority, right, in this group today, okay? So, we don't have the luxury of tying into the GIS database, pulling up all your information, and, calling up your marketing team to market your wood. I get calls and say, can you have your accounting department get back to us? I'm like, yeah, hold on a second, I'll get them, switch phones. So kind of a one-stop shop. So, just give you some advice of what we've seen and what we do. So obviously none of this would work if you don't have clients, okay? Got to have clients. And, some of you probably worked on clients for maybe the last 20 years. We're going back to people that I've managed their land for the last 25 years, even though my company's only been in place for 18 years now. I worked for other companies, and those landowners call me back to do work on their property. So it's long-term relationships you try to build. You always have those people that you're going to cut their wood once, and that's it, but you like to have those long-term clients. So we have a website. I'm not a website person. My son developed our website, so if you want to see what our website looks like, have at it. Good information on there. We send a lot of people that way to look at what we do and what we provide. Publicity. We have 2 vehicles, and we have our names on the side of our truck. I'm not incognito, so if you see, I'll have my name on the side of my vehicle. And of course, business cards. Everybody's got a business card. But what do you think I call what's our calling card? What would you say that is? When you go buy a job, you see a job done, you want to know, wow, who did that job? Looks great. Land is closed out. That's our calling card. I don't put up signs on those jobs. Thought about it, but it'd be a nightmare keeping track of all your signs and putting them up without people shooting them. But that's your, if people know you did a job that's down the road from so-and-so, they'll remember that. So they're like, it's what things look like when you're done. Some of the services, we get clients for some of the services we do. We do a lot of digital mapping, ArcMap, GPS, timber harvesting, obviously, and supervision, road and bridge construction and maintenance, timber appraisals. I can't do land appraisals, right? We're licensed foresters, but we can do timber appraisals. Forest management plans, I used to do USDA plans. I have no desire to do another one of those in my lifetime. I don't agree with the government to begin with, so I'm not going to advise people to get into it. So I guess you can figure out I'm not a Democrat. So locate boundary lines and maintenance. We do a lot of that. Land acquisition assessments, cruising woodlots, giving people what their value is, what it's worth. Silvicultural treatments. I'm not a licensed herbicide applicator. If I need help, I call Ron Lemin. I know he's here. I've seen him, so he's the guy. Wildlife habitat improvements. What we do provides wildlife habitat. General public doesn't maybe not get that, but we generate wildlife habitat. That's what we do. We do forestry. So, I'm sure a lot of you get your game while you're doing your job, right? And so wildlife habitat definitely benefits by what we do. And then land management inspections, inspecting your jobs, storm events. We've had a few 100-year storms in the last year. So, inspecting land and figuring out what damage there is and what needs to be done. So that's some of the ways that, you gain clientele, okay? And then referrals. Get referrals all the time from people. And so when someone calls and say, oh, I got your name from somebody, I'm like, well, who gave me my name? So it's always interesting to find out how that network works. So objectives. Landowners want to generate income. How many of you have been on, you walk someone's woodlot? I mean, you may not do, if you're working for industrial landowners, you're not going to get asked what you're going to generate off of this cut, okay? But if you work for private landowners, invariably, one of the first questions they'll ask is, now I'm not going to hold this to you, but if you do a harvest, what am I going to generate for income? I mean, 9 times out of 10, that's always asked before I leave it, always, okay? Nobody likes to give away money, obviously, so you want to get the best they can get for it. Timber stand improvement. There are those people who want to do pure timber stand improvement. Their goal is to not necessarily generate as much money as they can this cut, but they want to improve the stand by concentrating growth on those crop trees you're going to grow for the next harvest, next rotation. Salvage, storm, and disease. Who was involved with pine salvage over the last couple of years? I see a hand back there. Their hands, okay. How about, I almost said gypsy moth. I shouldn't say that, but how about spongy moth salvage? Anybody do any of that? Really? Oh, back there we got some back there. Yeah. Done tons of that down in the Stoneham area. Crazy. Bad. So, that's not necessarily the landowner's first objective, but when they see the wood falling down and dying, they're like, hey, we got to do something about it. So that's one of another objectives of landowners. Wildlife habitat. As I said before, wildlife habitat, we generate wildlife habitat, by what we do, what we leave. Maybe you're leaving snag trees out there. Some people call it a wildlife tree. Sometimes I'll put a W on a tree when I'm marking, or a big S for a snag tree. To maintain those out there. Other people want partridge habitat, right? They want a bird hunt, or they want woodcock habitat. So, that could be the landowner's objective. Their goal might not be to make any money off of a job. I mean, people say that. This is what I want at the end, okay? So you get a little different objective there than someone that says, I want the most dollar and get out of this woodlot before I sell it. Better access. I don't think I cut on very many woodlots that there isn't at least one trail through the woodlot, okay? And I don't mean it could be a snowmobile trail, but I mean, it might be their foot trail. There might be their hiking trail. And nobody wants brush on their trail when they're done, okay? Or they don't have trails and they want to generate a trail, so you're laying out your skid trails in a way so that when they're done, they have access across their woodlot. Okay. Prescription. What we think is what, how do I say this? Perception, I guess you call it. When you tell somebody we're going to do like a 40% selection harvest. I say that word, you're all you're all thinking, what's a 40%? You know, you got that in your head. What if you're marking, how many trees are you going to mark? But the landowners necessarily don't see it that way, okay? You know, they want to see what's it look like when it's done. You tell me I'm going to do this, what's it look like when it's done? So you got to give them an example to go look at maybe. Somebody, a lot of times they'll want to check out what you did on the last job somewhere. So send them there to see what it looks like. Or you can do a diameter by species limit. You know, I don't mark every woodlot. We got a cord up here, so I'm straddling it. Sorry about that. We don't mark every woodlot we cut, but because some, you know, what's the point of marking every fir and popple out there? If you're going to cut them, you're going to cut them. So, you know, what does a landowner want, and what's their long term? Do they, you know, does their woodlot warrant the cost of marking it for that landowner? Or a financial harvest, everything 8 inches and up. Okay, that could be someone's goal. You know, they're planning on, they bought this woodlot, they inherited it, they want to sell it. You know, the key is landowner objectives, and I guess I can't stress that enough. You know, what does the landowner want? Because if you don't meet what the landowner wants, you know, working on private landowners, you're not going to have many people to go back to work with. Okay. So, special requests. Again, there's not a single woodlot that I think I haven't worked on. There's the occasional woodlot owner that, you know, have at it, go take care of it. They don't want it, all they want is their check sent to them or to a P.O. box, and you cut their woodlot. You never see them again or talk with them. But most people have, hey, this is what I want done, and oh, by the way, keep an eye out for this. So, stone walls. There are some landowners that if I had cut a veneer oak and knocked over a stone, I was in big trouble off of a stone wall. They'd rather see that tree sit there and rot than for me to damage their stone wall. You know, thank God I don't have a lot of those, okay? But that's one special request you can get. Trail systems. You know, we're going to be doing a job in a couple weeks that, I don't know, there's probably 20 rolls of flagging laid out on all the trails across this property. I said, you know, this is kind of excessive. There's a lot of trails out here. Can we keep a few of them and the rest of them disregard? So we're working that one out of how to handle that one. Clearing areas and fields. Our company, we don't have excavators, so we rely on contractors we deal with to, you know, clear a field, stump it, or if you're going to, you know, use a fecon head to knock down the trees. But some people want to have their little food plot out there, and they want you to clear a spot, and they probably want you to stump it too at the same time. So, you know, you got to be careful if you're going to get involved with those kinds of things on how big of an area they want, where you're going to put the stumps, how much exposed soil you're going to have, and all those things you got to take into account if you're going to do those. Old foundations. Who's fallen in a well out there? Anybody fallen in a well by accident? Nobody. You guys got good feet. Somebody did raise their hand out there. You know, cemeteries. Anybody had a phone call, like you were cutting a woodlot, somebody called you and said, hey, you know there's a cemetery out there? I've had that happen to me, and you're kidding me. Well, I had laid out a road, and I was going right across the gravestones. I was like, well, I'm glad he called, you know, because I didn't see it because the gravestone was like 2 inches out of the ground, just covered with leaves, never knew it was there. So he came out and showed me. I was like, thank you, really appreciate that. So vernal pools, that's a bad word. Vernal pools aren't so bad as long as they don't have the words significant in front of them. That's a different one. Okay, but you know, vernal pools, if you've done a management plan for a landowner, you know, that map you're generating for a landowner, for a forest management plan or a tree growth plan, is that public information? You bet that map is. So, you know, if I find a vernal pool on somebody's land, it might be in their plan, but it's not on their map. The general public doesn't need to know that it exists out there unless that landowner decides they want to disclose that. Landing areas. Can't cut wood unless you have a landing. And this is one of the biggest headaches we deal with. okay? Where do you put the landing? Can you get a landing in? Because, you know, most people don't have a concept of what landing size you're going to need. You know, somebody approaches you and says, I want as clean as a whistle, I don't want any limbs out there, I want a biomast, and here's your landing, 50 by 50. It isn't gonna work, you know, so, you know, finding those landing areas, it could be on a neighbor, you know, or it could be on their land. It may not, you know, a lot of times they're not existing. You're generating that first landing for a landowner. And most of them have an alternative use they want to do on that landing when you're done. So, you know, are you going to gravel it? Are you going to make it a winter landing? What are you going to do? So that's you know, those are some considerations to think about. And then special sites. Might sound crazy to protect a rock. Well, I've had to do that, put flagging around it. Certain trees. Some people really love their trees, okay? You know, somebody once told me the best tree is a horizontal tree. I don't necessarily agree with that, but, you know, some people have a special tree they really care about. And the last thing you want to do is cut that tree because you'll never come back to that lot. Hunting stands, you know, tree stands. They're all supposed to be labeled wherever they are. If I picked up every hunting stand I found that's unlabeled, I'd have no room in my house. You know, they're everywhere. So, you know, find out. You come across a stand, find out whose it is. Try to find out whose it is. Every once in a while, you find one that's labeled. That's very handy with a phone number. You can call them. Because they don't want their tree stands damaged, typically. If you can't find out whose it is, just kind of spread the word. You're going to do some harvesting, and all of a sudden, they disappear. They come and get them. So, operational layout needs. You know, this is a big part of what you do on every private landowner, okay? And boundary lines is a huge one. You know, if you're working on company land, those lines have been established for a long time. They're usually pretty easy to follow, hopefully. And some companies had rotations and, you know, that did them on a regular basis. Private landowners, not so much. Okay, so you don't want a timber trespass violation. Okay, and because if you don't know where those lines are, you better back off your cut from that line so you're not going to cross it. So boundary lines, we do a lot of Sherlock Holmes smithing. You know, deed research. Hopefully, when you're doing a layout and you're finding the property lines, you come across a survey pin that the bear haven't chewed off the top of the cap, you know, so you can find out who the licensed surveyor is. Track them down, and hopefully you can get a survey of that area. That's the best way. But deeds, you know, identifying the proper boundary lines is really key. We're going to show you some pictures and stuff, but just kind of as you think about layout, brooks, streamside, you know, management zones, stream crossings. You know, again, there's very few woodlots you're going to work on, or at least I work on, that don't have at least one stream out there, or a wetland, or some kind of protection zone that's out there. You know, or it could be in a city watershed. No whole other thing you didn't think about. Trails comes up all the time. You know, I know. You know, there are certain trails that are more important than others. You know, if you're working next to the Appalachian Trail, that could be pretty important. I think they're all marked now, but when I first started, there were lots of places across the state, they weren't even on the ground. They were putting them on the ground. So that was a challenge if you're working in some of those areas. Special sites, I'm going to talk about some of those, you know, again, what people have out there, because, again, what you might think is normal or common, they might just think the world of this. That's a special site that they have, and they don't want to see it damaged. Landing areas and access. Again, you can't cut wood if you can't get there, and you have no place to put it. So, you know, that's a huge one that we deal with. And this one's a lot of times overlooked, but, you know, the prescription, where you're going to mark it, or what you're going to do, you know, well, how are you going to instruct that contractor to cut this woodlot? So, let's look at some examples here. So, boundary lines. Trying to find, the middle picture there has got a survey pin. We love that when we find one of those. That's great. On the left here, you got a corner post, but then a pipe a little further away from it. Which one's really the corner? That kind of thing. And then on the right, that's a boundary line that we've blazed and painted for a client. And that when you walk across one of the lines we've done, you get on the line, you can look up and down it, and you'll be able to see it. That's what when somebody asks us to do boundary lines, that's what we try to produce. But again, you can't cut someone's woodlot if you don't know where the boundaries are. And, on all those pictures you see pink. We just have kind of a color scheme we do. Pink for property lines, blue for brooks, and orange or orange and blue for special stuff. So any contractors I work with, they know what that is. Some guys are colorblind. Anybody work with a colorblind contractor? Yep, there are a lot of them. They see movement all the time, but they don't necessarily see color. Okay, so you just got to be aware of that. Brooks and streamside zones. So, that brook right there, the first one on the left, that's a well-defined channel. No problem calling that. Still probably an intermittent stream, but if you get mud in that brook and it goes downstream, what's the common word that the state uses for if it's a stream? Starts with a C. Connectivity. It may not be a channel, but if it connects to a stream, you're on the hook for it. So you got to be watching for it. The next picture is a double blue. That's usually you do double blue along a wetland 75-foot zone or a mapped stream that's greater, that's on a USGS map. And then the far right one's orange and blue was a 250-foot buffer for around a large wetland. But just laying out those zones, because if you're gonna cut in there, you want the contractor to know where the lines are that you're going to divide by. Brook crossings. By the way, all these pictures are our pictures. We like pictures, so I have lots of pictures. When I worked for a company, we used to have this Hall of Shame picture thing. The guy who started that is dead now, but it was always a good sight to look at that, remind you what can happen. Okay, so stream crossings. That first upper left is a big stream, and we cross that in the summertime. So you got to have the right crossing. We had 25-foot bridge mats across that with logs on the sides. Wintertime crossing, another skidder crossing to the right there, another one bottom, and another one in the wintertime. But picking the stream crossings. I don't know about you, but I like to pick the crossings where we're going to go. It doesn't matter if it's a few feet up or down, but, it should be our job is to locate where those crossings are so the contractors know where to go. If you just say, hey, cross wherever, and they cross wherever, it's going to be your fault, okay? And, all these structures are pulled because you can't leave these are temporary crossings. You can't leave them in for a certain period of time, so you got to pull them out, and get them taken care of. So the idea is that you got to plan where those crossings are going to be. I love cutting woodlots with no brooks. That's ideal, right? Trails. The lower picture on the right, if we use that road like we did on the lower right with the processor, that landowner would not be very happy, okay? But it could be an ITS trail. There's lots of those all over the place and lots of little connector trails. So you got to be aware of, it seems like invariably there's always some kind of trail across a lot we're cutting on. Special sites. I brought this up a little bit, but, there's one of the rocks I protected. It's not this big. It's pretty big. It's too big for me to carry out. I like white rocks around my house. But the one in the middle with that birch grew around a stump, grew over top of it, and the stump rotted away. that was their special tree, you know. It's one of the first ones I put a splash of paint on. Get it out of there. It's not going to last very long, right? Well, that was their favorite tree, so we made sure that one was left. I still don't know what that one with the box is. It's not a well. It's just concrete box somebody threw some wood in. I have no idea. Nobody knows anything about it. I don't think there's any bodies in it, but the one to the right, anybody know what plant that is? Yell it out. Oh, I don't know the bee balm. That's what I know. Bee balm. Yeah, that was one of the landowners had planted flowers. I would have never expected this landowner to plant flowers, but they did. And it was right next to a landing, and we were going to pile logs on it. And good thing I didn't, you know, this flower patch. You know, chaga. Some people just love their chaga. It's a good thing. Tea's good. If you never had it, you should try it. Old stove. You know, that was their reference point. You go up to the old stove, bear left, and you're there. That's important to some people. And then that crazy cedar, you know, that was something special. Landowner may not tell you right up front, but it'll come out typically when you're partially doing things. Oh, by the way, did you find this on my land? I want you to protect that. I got paint on it. So we'll put flagging around it now, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, here's some special sites. Just took this picture yesterday on the upper left, sugar bush. You know, I'd forgotten it was there. And I asked the landlord, what do you want to do? We'll cut right up to it, just don't cut any of my maple trees, you know. So a lot more sugar bushes out there than used to be, a lot more. And a lot more people contemplating them. What's the picture on the top there of the animals? Anybody know what those are? Where's our wildlife guy? Those are coyote pups. I should have killed them. I had the technology with me to do it, but I just couldn't do it. I stepped over a log and jumped me. You know, I was like, whoa, look at that. I'll probably never see that again in my lifetime. All the years I've been in the woods, never seen that before. But, like I say, should have eliminated them, but I didn't. You know, a nest on the right there. What's that red pine? Anybody know what might be that red pine? It's kind of hard to see. It's a bear tree. Yep. A bear, I mean, it's been marked up that way for a year. That red pine's probably 18, 19 inches in diameter. I mean, there was a series of these across the hillside over in Milton. Couldn't believe it. So I was like, well, we're going to leave that tree, you know. I don't even know what this stone looked like, a fort, middle of nowhere. That's what was unique, and so we left it. A spring house in the bottom, and then kind of neat on the right-hand side there, that's a spring. And that little disc you see there just spins when the water comes out of the ground. I've never seen anything like that. I didn't find it. My son found that, and he said, you know about that spring? And I was like, what spring? You know, it never will be bottled, I'm sure, but nonetheless, it's a spring. So be aware of these special sites. You know, they're out there. People care about them. Landing areas. Again, you can't cut wood if you don't have a landing. Okay? So, you know, you got to have a big enough landing to sort what you're going to do. Okay? The products you're going to have come out, and I mean, you know, I'm sure you hear it from contractors. Man, I got 6 sorts on this yard. What do you want me to do? I don't have enough room. Okay? You got to have enough room to do it on. And when you're done, what's it going to look like? We end up mowing a bunch of landings for people. You know, that's our McCormick with a Machio mower on there. Works great. Just don't want to throw teeth off of it, but that does happen. But, you know, landowners use that landing for something more than you think when you're done. So the days of leaving landings looking a mess and having, you know, debris everywhere, most people aren't gonna want that. Access. You know, this is an old road to the left, and the new road, well, the same spot. We just rebuilt the road and put one of Dirigo's box culverts in. You know, great piece of equipment, and now we have access. Could we have driven across that, fixed it up a little bit, maybe in the wintertime, but this was a summer access, and the landowner wanted to be able to go in and out of there at all times. Well, wasn't going to work that way. You might have to, an old road, this is an old road to the left that we want to get to the top of the mountain. It's grown in. It was last cut like 25 years ago. So brought a buncher in, cut the brush back on the upper right-hand picture, and rebuilt the road, the lower right-hand picture. Two different spots. It's not the same spot, but it's the idea of going from far left to usable to the far right. You got to get a truck in there, and most people have center mounts today. There's still wheelers out there, but there's a lot of center mounts. Can't get a center mount a lot of places where wheelers went. Just hard to do. New access. You might have a landowner that bought a piece of land, there's not even a road there, so you gotta lay one out. I love building roads. Roads are fun, they're expensive. So when you build a road, you wanna put it at the right spot and have the landowner, get their money's worth of what they're building, and anytime you can use any, well, who builds roads in here? Just raise your hand. So, you can build a road with material that's on site, it's always cheaper. So you can, grub it, pull up material. Even if you got to dig out a borrow pit and spread it, then you can skim it with a surface coat. That's going to give you good access. And if a landowner wants to put a camp in there someday, how many people from out of state come and buy a piece of land and they put a road in that you can't get snow off of? Right? Just a little dinky road. Where are you going to put the snow in the winter? You got to think about all those things, and you got to think about them for them a lot of times and advise them so they don't build a road 3 times when they could have done it right the first time. New structures. You might need culverts. There's a cross drain on the picture on the left there. There's a box culvert in the front of it here. We crossed a bigger brook. You might need a steel bridge. If you need a steel bridge with concrete decking like that, that's the way to go. But they're not cheap. But once you put it in, you're done, as long as you make the opening big enough. And that's what's been the kicker on these structure issues. If you own company land, how many people have overspent their maintenance budget over the last couple of years? Because the storm events we've had just wiped us right out. If you work in Western Maine, you got hammered. Okay, so building the right size when you put them in, and not overbuilding them. Can't afford to build every structure 100-year flood structure. You just can't afford to do that, unless you're the government. Then you can do it. But or you need a wood structure. You might want to have a smaller bridge that's a short-lived bridge. Put a hemlock bridge in. A lot of hemlocks become a lot more important. There's a lot of guys who saw hemlock and they do it well, and you can get it a little more readily. Just it's the span width that gets you on hemlock. You can't go that far. So, marking. Who marks timber in the wood in this room? Wow, not many. Okay, it's a dying art. Okay, I probably mark 70% of the woodlots we cut. Some years it's higher, some years it's lower. But landowners like to see that paint out there, and I'll say that. Some landowners don't want to see paint when they're done. Okay, I don't know about you, I mark the base of the tree and the bole of the tree. I had some people that don't want me to mark the base of the tree. Like, well, why did I mark? Why should I mark this then? But they don't want to see paint when they walk back through the woodlot. Not very many people do that, but it happens. But marking, it just is a good way. I do it visually because the loggers I work with, they can cut a lot more wood, a lot faster and more efficiently. And we mark on both sides of the tree, so that guy can see it from any direction he's coming from. I've never been a dot kind of guy. Can't see one dot on one side of the tree unless you're coming up the hill or going down the hill. So you got to make it visible. So you can't expect a logger to do a good job if you don't give him good marking to cut. Or you could do diameter limit by species. Those lots weren't marked because there was a lot of hemlock thinning on the left one, and with fir, and the right one was popple mixed in with hardwood, and it wasn't quality wood. There was no sense in marking those. I mean, I could have, but why put paint on popple? So making the prescription for what the landowner wants And because, you know, when we market wood lot, it costs the landowner for that, okay? If you're doing a prescription, there's no cost to that. So, but it bears more on the logger to get done what you think you want to do with your eye when you cut him loose. So contractor choice. None of us in here would have a job if we don't have contractors, okay? And that's, you know, we all need contractors, and we need good contractors. And there's a lot less good contractors out there than there used to be. And so I work with mechanical crews with chipping. I got cut the length systems we work with forwarders, and cable operators, grapple operators, that some guys have a grapple with a cable, hand crews. But who still has hand crews they work with? More hands than I expected, really, okay? There's some good guys out there that still do good work, okay? And sometimes the size of the lot dictates you go to a smaller piece of equipment, because that landowner doesn't want a landing to turn a center mount around on. They want a wheeler to come in there, so you gotta tailor that. So, you know, mechanized, fully mechanized. You know, you saw cutting that the softwood that they were talking about for Wagner. You know, that softwood, great idea. Putting a buncher ahead, laying it down. He's just laying down wood, and the next guy comes in and merchandises it. You know, and it takes a lot less time for that processor guy to cut that. Guys that do with a buncher, their production is a lot higher. You know, we have guys that do that on private land. You know, that will go in, bring a buncher in first, pull a processor in behind it, and go after that. But, you know, having the right equipment for that site, you see that landing size, that's not a small landing, okay? It's a little heliport. So, you know, you need to, what's a landowner want when they're done, okay? Cut the length systems, you know, just a variety of different type of equipment that we've used. You know, I prefer a fixed head over a dangle head. Just gives you a better job, unless you're cutting softwood and in the middle of nowhere. But fixed head, you can control the wood, and that's kind of what we prefer. Hand crews, you know, there's a grapple there in the middle. Hand crew cuts, you know, there's guys who work with one contractor. He lays the wood down with a buncher. He limbs it by hand, pulls it out with a cable or a grapple, and then he slash it on the landing. Not many of those guys out there, but does a great job. So, you know, just matching the job to the contractor. And then markets and merchandising. This goes back to the contractor too. You know, you can cut wood all day long, but at the end of the day, what's that landowner going to get for a check? They all want it. Once you start sending checks, most landowners are like, hey, keep these coming. You know, they like that money coming. But they don't know what they could have made if it had been merchandised a little better. So this is the order that we go. Biomass is the lowest, pulpwood is above it. Then you cut pallet logs out. We do a lot of pallet logs to various facilities. Saw logs, you got to sell the saw logs to, you know, you got to know the markets. I can't call my marketing division and ask them where I should sell the wood. We are the marketing division, you know. Got to know what wood's worth. Who's buying it? Who's buying what lengths they want, you know. And if you supply those saw logs to a mill at the right lengths, they're going to want to continue to do business with you. If they're always going, oh man, here's another one of their trucks coming in, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb, okay? And if you're selling, this is all private landowners' wood, so you gotta have a place for it. If you go into the landowner and say, hey, I can cut your pine, I can cut this, I can cut that, well, I can't cut these three tree species, they're going to find somebody else, okay? If you can't utilize the wood you're cutting, they're not going to use you. And then veneer. So, sorting products. Should be able to go on a landing and figure out what these piles are. If it's all thrown into one pile, and that trucker comes in at night and loads it up, the landowner takes it on the chin. And if you're working for a big landowner, the landowner still takes it on the chin. So you got to market your wood to the best value. So sorting your products. You know, when's a good time to cut mat logs? That's a big mat log pile on the right there. You know, you got, this is popple logs on the left-hand side. You know, sometimes popple logs are good, sometimes they're not. You just got to know what's happening to do it. Veneer. We scale all the veneer in the woods pretty much. And, you know, nice red oak slicer on the left, curly maple in the middle, and a nice bird's eye on the right. You know, don't take too many of those logs to add up. When you can cut a bird's eye log like that and pay for a whole load of saw logs in one log, you don't want to miss it. So, I'm just going to list these up here, getting to the end. So, you run an operation for a private landowner. You got to do periodic inspections. That's a no-brainer. You might think that might sound crazy, but if you're not out there inspecting the crews, if the landowners ask you a question, some landowners will walk every day. I got people who will walk every day on the job. It kind of drives me crazy, you know. Then you have somebody else that's never there, and they're relying totally on you to do the job. Landowner updates. It was hard to get updates to landowners in the past. Snap them a picture. I send pictures all the time to landowners. They love it. Oh, send me another one, you know. So just give them a picture of a log truck or, you know, a buncher cutting a tree with some sawdust flying out. People love those kinds of pictures. Scale reconciliation. We have to make sure the mills are paying what we said they were going to pay. Did I get the scale slip for every load we sent? That kind of thing. That all takes time, okay? Tracking trip tickets, and whether it's a pulp load to a paper mill or it's a sawmill load. And then stumpage payments. You know, who does their own stumpage payments for landowners? I just want to see your hands. Yeah, there's a lot less hands, okay? Somebody else is usually paying, after you're cutting that wood, someone else is paying it for you. It's a different ballgame. I used to not think about cash flow. Cash flow is a big deal. You know, if we have a long spring, this has been a good main spring. You know, if it keeps on raining and things don't dry out, there's going to be less contractors going back to work when things start happening. You know, cash flow is important. And stumpage payments to landowners, they don't understand the time lag from a load going in to when it gets paid. I don't know how much time I spend explaining that to landowners. That's a huge, huge issue, okay? When the job's done, they're going to get a couple more checks after that. They want to see checks right away. It's like, it's got to go through the system, you know? Aesthetics, that's like I said, a calling card. If your landings look nice when they're done, that says a lot. If it's messy, or what's probably the number one call that Maine Forest Service gets, especially this time of year? Mud on the highway. You know, a load of crushed rock or 2 loads of crushed rock can eliminate a lot of headaches, you know, at an entrance. You know, so, you know, we don't want logging to have a bad name. You know, clear cutting got a bad name. It was taboo for such a long time. Some of that's because of what we, you know, write in people's faces, you know. So we just got to be careful of aesthetics. You know, people love aesthetics. And then closeout, what things look like. Do you pull your stream crossings? You know, you got to get them out of the water. I mean, even if you got a bank-to-bank crossing, you got to get them out of there. So, you know, I know this is a lot, but this is what we deal with on private landowners all the time. And it's, you just get done with one job and you got to go to the next one. So you got to have a pipeline. I wish I had hundreds of thousands of acres like I used to have, and we're going to go here, we're going to go here, we're going to go here, we're going to go there. I might worry about a property line here or there, but not every day and all the issues you deal with private landowners. So if you've never done it, it's an eye-opener, okay? And you got to be a salesman as well as a good forester, because if you can't sell what you're going to do, people aren't going to buy it. So that's it. Got questions? Fire away. Yes, go ahead.
What was your smallest profitable lot?
Smallest profitable lot. Cut one this winter that was 18 acres. Unbelievable profit. To the landowner, to the logger, and to our company, okay? Because it had a lot of high-end maple on it. You know, I mean, you cut a couple of slicer maple, and I told the landowner when I got done marking, I said, I'm telling you, if this cuts out, you're going to be surprised. Because the number I gave you to start, is gonna be much better than that. And in this case, it was. But you don't wanna, I was tempted to say, you're gonna make X amount of dollars, but I didn't see what the wood looked like till it opened up, how big was the heart and all that. And it turned out to be really good. But it's hard to go, if someone calls me with a 10-acre woodlot, boy, that's hard to make something like that worthwhile to get a logger there. You got to pay a logger, and that's the thing. We're not going to get into any antitrust situations here, but you got to pay loggers to do the job right. And you got to pay landowners a fair stumpage price. And we as a company have to make a fair profit. Everybody has to make money or somebody goes home empty. And you can't do that too long. So it's a fine line, and it's a good thing the markets are so great and everything is not a problem. You can sell your wood everywhere, So it's not gotten any easier, let's put it that way. But yes, that was the most recent one. Yeah. Acreage size is a big plus, but quality wood is even bigger. I used to I worked on company land. We had nice timber on our company land, but it was hard to get to. You had to build a lot of road to get there, a lot of infrastructure to get there. We hunted up in the North Maine woods, moose hunting the last couple of years, and there's some nice wood up there. But I don't want to go up there and cut it. I'm not going to mark it either. It's pretty steep, So small woodlots have a lot of volume on them. That's the amazing thing, and I've come to learn that over the years. Just because someone calls and they have an 18-acre woodlot, I better go look at it before I say no. Any other questions? Yes. How do I charge? By the hour. Yep, I charge by the hour, and usually I have the landowner walk right with me if they want to. Just tell them whatever you're going to wear, make sure it doesn't, if you don't care if it has blue paint on you, because you will get blue on you. And usually after an hour or so, they're like, go ahead. I'm not going to keep up with you. Don't worry about it. So that's how I do it. And, we don't charge the landowner right up front. We take it out of stumpage. And most landowners, I'm able to do that with what we set up. So that works out well. There's no money out of the landowner's pocket. So it's a win for the landowner.
Any other questions for Steve?
Yes. All the time. I shouldn't say all the time, but I'd say 70% of the time, a load of firewood's, hey, can you drop me a load of firewood? So what we do is we pay the contractor a roadside price. And if they say, well, I don't want it here on this lot, I want it delivered to my house, then it's a delivered price. I try personally, or what we do with the contractors we work with, we all know people who want to buy firewood, and we deal with them. We know we get paid when we deliver it, we're going to get paid. I don't want to chase any money for firewood, and we deal with some large firewood operators throughout the state. They're good outlets. But you might need to put a landing on a neighbor. Couple cord of firewood goes a long, long way. And it's by the cord. I say that, but we'll weigh it if it's going to some of the firewood facilities have scales now, so we weigh it and sell it by the ton. But it's 8 to 9 cord on a wheeler and 12 cords on a center mount.
Any other questions?
And I wanted to thank Seth because, it's mills like that help us out. We need all the mills we can get. And if we don't have the markets, we can cut the wood, but if we don't have the markets to sell it to, we're up the creek. So, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.